Well, praise the Lord that Jesus paid it all. We couldn't do anything on our part to earn our salvation, but Jesus paid the price for that. Thank the Lord for that. This morning we're going to use number 2. It was played earlier this morning on the piano here. This is my Father's world. You know, when you look around and about and you see all the beauty of the springtime and just take into consideration all that God did for us and how He made everything so beautiful, and then thinking that He even paid the price for our redemption. My, oh my. Let's stand together and sing number 2.
This is my Father's world, and to my listening ears, all nature sings and round me rings the music of the spheres. This is my Father's world. I rest in the fold of rocks and trees, of skies and seas, and the wonders wrought. This is my Father's world, the earth where carols raise, the morning light, the lily white, declare their Maker's praise. This is my Father's world. He shines in all that's there. In the rustling grass I hear Him pass. He speaks to me everywhere. This is my Father's world. Oh, let me hear forever that though the wrong seems also strong, God is the ruler yet. This is my Father's world. The battle is not done. Jesus, who none shall be satisfied, and earth and heaven be one. Should love a sinner such as I, should yearn to change my sorrow into rest, nor rest till He hath planned to bring me nigh. How wonderful is love like this! Such love, such wondrous love, such love, such wondrous love, that God should love a sinner such as I. How wonderful is love!
love. That last verse says, and now he takes me to his heart, a son. He asked me not to fill a servant's place, the far-off country wanderings all are done. Wide open are his arms of grace. Thank God for that wonderful love. You know, to think of it, that we were a sinner condemned to die, and because of that great love that he had for us, that he left heaven and came down here upon this earth and gave his life, he now takes us into has his arms open, and he doesn't ask us to fill a servant's spot, but we're adopted into the family of God, and we're one of his children. My, oh my. It makes me think of that song, My Father is rich in houses and lands. We have a great Heavenly Father, and we thank the Lord for that. We welcome everyone to the service this morning. It's good to see everyone out on this beautiful morning. This morning when I got up, I looked out the window, and I saw the great clouds, and I thought, are we in for another dreary day? And then I saw that the clouds were breaking just a little bit, and I could see I didn't see the sun, but I saw the light of the sun coming through those clouds. And I think of such a beautiful morning as we have here this morning. This morning we want to think of, as we're thinking of Easter, and this being Palm Sunday, we're going to be speaking on the thought of Christ entering into Jerusalem. And as we think of that thought, you know, where Christ, a few weeks ago when I was preaching, preaching on Peter there, and as we think of Peter and his great faith, and then sometimes his faith was not always as strong as it should have been, but God really showed Peter and his disciples had some great experiences together. And here, as we look at the message this morning, we again realize where Jesus is there with his disciples, and as he's making his way into Jerusalem. And I'm going to be taking the thoughts out of Matthew this morning, out of chapter 21, verses 1 through 11. Now, the account of Jesus entering into Jerusalem is mentioned in the four Gospels. And it has the same thought. It might be worded a little bit different, but it's where Jesus is making his way into Jerusalem, knowing what lies before him, that he was going to give his life for the sin of the whole world. As he makes his way there, we start there in chapter 21 of Matthew, and it says, and when they drew nigh unto Jerusalem, and were come to Bethpage, unto the Mount of Olives, then sent Jesus two disciples. Now, we have been more or less thinking of the thought of Peter, but this morning we're taking the 12 disciples into the picture, where Jesus is meeting with them. We're going to, and as we think of Jesus entering Jerusalem the week before the crucifixion, there's a lot of things take place, and we want to touch a few of them. But where Jesus enters now, it says, and he drew nigh to Jerusalem unto Bethpage. Now, Bethpage was a village near Bethany, and it was about a mile east of Jerusalem. So it really wasn't that far. You think traveling a mile on foot, why, that might seem quite a distance, but it really ain't that far. But to think of it, that he knew what lays ahead of him. So Jesus says here to his disciples here, And he said in verse 2 it says, in verse 1, pardon me. In verse 2 he says, Jesus sent two disciples. In verse 2 then it says, saying, go into the village over against you, and straightway ye shall find an ass, a donkey, tied and a colt with her. Loose them and bring them unto me. Now, here we find, it doesn't say which disciples he sent, but we find that he says to two of his disciples, go into the village, and he says, over against you, and straightway when you enter into the village here, you're going to find this donkey that is tied there, and a colt. Now it says when you find them, why you lose them, you untie their rope or whatever they're tied with, and you bring them to me. And you don't find anywhere in Scripture, in any of the four Gospels, that any of the disciples, that were sent, asked any questions. They went immediately. And wouldn't that be great if we could do that? Or if we would do that? We could, but we don't. If we would do that, when Jesus says, George, I want you to do this. And George says nothing. He goes and does it. Or if he says to Eli, you go and do it, and Eli doesn't balk in any way of any kind, but he goes and does it. And you don't ask any questions. And we find here that Jesus, that the disciples went, and they got the donkey and the colt. Now, some of the Gospels don't mention the donkey and the colt, they just mention one. But it says, now if any man says anything to you, and if any man say aught unto you, ye shall say, the Lord has need of them, and straightway he will send them. Now that brings us something else. Now, would we be willing to surrender our possession to Christ that quickly? If anybody says if he says anything, why you just say the Lord has need of them, and that's the way it was. The Gospels mention that, and they went and they got this colt, this donkey, and they brought the colt, the donkey, and the colt to him. And we find here that if anyone says anything, you just say the Lord. The Lord has need of it. Everything belongs to the Lord anyhow. We don't have anything of ourselves. Whatever we have is the Lord's. And if only we could surrender everything to Him, like this fellow here did to the donkey. And it says, and this was done that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet, saying, tell ye the daughters of Zion, behold, the King cometh unto thee, meek and sitting upon an ass, a colt of a foal of an ass. The donkey, the colt. Now, I never rode a donkey. To tell you the truth, I never rode a horse either. And to tell you the truth, I don't expect to either. But it says this was a donkey where never anybody sat on. Now, I tried to ride a pony one time, and it didn't go so well, so I didn't do it again. But here was a donkey that was never ridden before. And they go and get this young donkey, and they bring it to Jesus. And as they bring this donkey to Jesus, it says the disciples went and did as Jesus commanded. No questions asked. They went and they did it, and they brought this donkey, and they brought it to Jesus. And as they brought this donkey to Jesus, it says, and as they brought this donkey to Jesus, they sat him on it, on this donkey, on the colt, which was never ridden before. And of course, he had to ride about a mile on this donkey that was never ridden before. But it says that they brought okay, I'm going to stop there a little bit. And now this, in verse 5, I read there where this was a prophecy that is being fulfilled at this time. It says, and that is taken out of Zechariah. Zechariah prophesied that the daughter of Zion, behold, the king cometh unto thee, riding on a donkey. Now, I also read something interesting yesterday, and I'm going to turn to chapter 62 of Isaiah, and I want to read. No, I'm not going to read it. I'm not going to read the chapter. I'm just going to turn to that chapter, and I'm going to read what my footnote says there concerning this portion of Scripture. In Isaiah chapter 62 and verse 11, it says, it speaks there about the restoration of Zion. Now, in my Bible, the footnote here says this. This chapter outlines the conditions that are preparatory to the deliverance of Zion and the establishment of Christ's kingdom. Righteousness and salvation will burst forth as a light upon the Gentiles. Do you hear that? A light unto the Gentiles. Who are the Gentiles? We are the Gentiles. So here is a prophecy referring to this very time when Christ is going to make his entry into Jerusalem and give his life, and the blood that is shed on the cross is going to be for our redemption. He says, moreover, the Gentiles will not merely observe this light, but will receive it. Israel will change its reality, that she will be called by a new name. Now, I found that rather interesting. Maybe you didn't, but I did. That back in Isaiah's time, he was prophesying concerning that the salvation that is going to be brought upon the Jews is also going to be for the Gentiles. Now, we go back here into Matthew again, and it says there in verse 6, and the disciples went and did as Jesus commanded them. And he brought the donkey and then the colt, and they put on them their clothes. They put blankets or whatever they had that they didn't need, and they put on this donkey, and it says, and they set him thereon. Now, can you imagine a donkey being calm enough to stand still for something like this? Of course, the donkey don't seem too bright to me either, but that's beside the point. It was bright enough that Jesus could make the donkey talk. That God could make the donkey talk. And if I bet, I'm betting, no. But I say, I have a feeling that if I would say we're going to have praise meeting this morning, some of you would stay sitting. Does anybody want to say I'm wrong? But yet he could make a donkey talk. So why couldn't he make me talk? Well, anyways, they sat him on, and he started toward Jerusalem. Now it says here, and I find this very interesting, and you know, the devil tried to tell me during the night that you preached on this sermon so many times in your lifetime, you can't say anything new. Well, why should I? Because he saved me over 70 years ago. So why should I have something new? Because he's just so wonderful. Anyhow, he goes toward Jerusalem. Now it says, and a very great multitude spread their garments. Now they put garments on him. They spread garments in the way for this donkey to walk over. And it says, and they cut down branches from trees and strawed them in the way. They spread them in the way. And it says, and the multitudes. What did they do? It says, and the multitudes that went before and that followed cried, saying, Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest. Now here it says multitudes that went before and that followed. How many people are in a multitude? I don't know. But it's more than two, I would think. Or I would have said a few went before, or a few went behind. But this was multitudes. Now, how much noise do you think a multitude can make? It gets rather noisy, doesn't it? I would think. I wasn't there, but I know that at our family dinner sometimes it gets rather noisy. And that ain't a multitude. It's just a family. But these are multitudes. Not one multitude, but multitudes that went before and that followed, and they cried, Hosanna to the Son of David. And it says, and when they were come into Jerusalem, they did this for 1 mile. They came into the city of, in all the city into Jerusalem. It says, all the city was moved, saying, who is this? Remember, not too many weeks ago, in our sermon, I was referring there to Peter and Jesus, when Jesus asked the question, whom do men say that I am? And what did Peter say? He said, thou art the Christ. Now here he comes in. Now here the multitudes, they come into Jerusalem, and when they come into Jerusalem, the people in Jerusalem, they say, who is this? Do you think Peter kept quiet? It don't say that he did, but don't say that he didn't. And I believe he didn't. I believe Peter spoke up and said, this is the Christ. It doesn't say that here, but he wasn't shy in keeping it to himself. And Jesus says, but whom say men that I am? And they said, well, some say that thou art John the Baptist, others say that thou art Elias, and others say, he's a great prophet. And then Jesus said, but whom say ye that I am? Whom say ye that I am? I wonder how many of those people that said, who is this? Maybe the next day or a few days later, maybe turned their back on him. It says, and the multitude said, this is Jesus. It says here, Peter didn't have to say it. It says it here. And the multitude said, this is Jesus, the prophet of Nazareth of Galilee. What did some of the people there in Nazareth say when Jesus began preaching? And he said some things that they kind of stirred up their minds. They said, can any good thing come out of Nazareth? Well, it sure did. It sure did. Okay, well, we need to move on here. All right. We find then, as Jesus comes into Jerusalem, of course, he goes into the temple. That's where he belonged, and that's where the Christians belonged. But it says as he went there into the temple, he saw some things in there that he didn't like. And Jesus went into the temple of God and cast out them that sold and bought in the temple, and overthrew the tables of the money changers and the seats of them that sold doves, and said unto them, It is written, My house shall be called the house of prayer, but ye have made it a den of thieves. And the blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them. And when the chief priests and scribes saw the wonderful things that he did, the children crying in the temple and saying, Hosanna to the Son of David, they were sore displeased. Now here the scribes, the chief priests and the scribes, it says they saw the wonderful things he was doing. He was healing those that were lame, and he was doing some good. And even the children, the little children, were crying and praising God, and they were displeased. Then said unto him, Hearest thou what these say? And Jesus saith unto them, Yea, have ye never read out of the mouth of babes and sucklings thou hast perfected praise? Little children crying. And parents are probably wondering, what are they crying about? They were praising the Lord. And my, oh my. And he was healing there. Now, about these money changers. Excuse me. Now, in the temple there, they had these money changers where you had to have, if I understand it right, and I don't always understand everything right, they had these money changers where you had to change money into special currency so you could pay your tithe or whatever you had to do in there. Made me think of when I was in Jamaica. Of course, when you went to Jamaica there, you had to get the American money currency changed over to the Jamaican, and it's a big difference. And if you weren't careful, they ripped you off. And I think they were maybe doing that here too. In the temple, you'd think they'd treat you honest, but it doesn't seem that way to me. But while they would change their currency to what they had to have in the temple, let me read this. Money changers. Temple dues could be paid only in sacred coinage. And it was necessary to change one's money. The selling of doves was for the purpose of sacrifice. This exchange became a source of extortion for the family of the high priest. So they would change their currency. They sold doves for sacrifice, and people were getting ripped off. And Jesus said, "You made my house a den of thieves." I wonder what they would say about some of this church today. I hope we're not in that category. But They were there. And of course, he overthrew the money changers. And of course, this got them stirred up. And all this was leading up to the time that they're going to crucify him. Of course, then a lot of things happened throughout that week. Throughout the week, they leave the temple, and then they have the cursing of the fig tree, and they wonder, well, why did this fig tree didn't have no fruit? So Jesus cursed the fig tree, and it withered up overnight. And of course, they wondered why this. Why did this take place? They had a lot of things took place, and all this leads up to the time of the crucifixion. And that brings us up to our next thought. And the next thought that we're thinking of here is there in chapter 26. There we have where Jesus meets with his disciples for the Last Supper before he goes on the cross. And we just had communion here a few weeks ago. But we know that as Jesus met with his disciples there for the Last Supper, again, listen here, it says, now the feast of the Passover of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying unto him, where wilt thou that we prepare for thee to eat the Passover? And he said, go into the city to such a man, and say unto the man, the master saith, my time is at hand, and I will keep the Passover at thine house with my disciples. How much preparation was there for this man to get ready, the place ready for the disciples to enter and come and have the Passover. And the disciples did as Jesus had appointed them, and they made ready the Passover. Now when evening was come, he sat down with his 12, with the 12 all being present. He sat down with the 12, and when evening was come, I read that. And as they did eat, he said, verily I say unto you, that one of you shall betray me. One of you. 13 people in the room. The one was Jesus, so they knew it wasn't him. But one of you, 12, is going to betray me. And they were exceeding sorrowful, and began every one of them to say unto the Lord, is it I? Is it I? And he answered and said, he that dippeth his hand with me in the dish, the same shall betray me. And there was Judas, the very one that Jesus knew was going to betray him. And of course, then we know what goes on there in that upper room, that they had the Last Supper. And Jesus says at one place, I'm not sure if it's in Matthew or if it's in Luke, but at one place he said, with desire have I desired to eat this Passover with you. And it says it's the last time he's going to eat it with them until he eats it anew in the kingdom. Anew. So they had the Last Supper together where Jesus he said about the bread representing his body, the cup representing the blood that was going to be shed. But then we go a little bit further. And we come down to 31 there in chapter 26. And this is the thought we're going to end at this morning. Everything was going pretty good so far. Just a few days ago, they entered into Jerusalem. My, oh my, what a wonderful time. They had that situation there in the temple. They saw a lot of things that week that we didn't even touch on this morning. They saw a lot of things in their life, just those three and a half years that they're going to remember forever. And then they come down to this. Then said Jesus unto them, all ye shall be offended because of me this night. Getting pretty close. Jesus said, all of you, you're going to be offended of me this night. For it is written, I will smite the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock shall be scattered abroad. But after I am risen, I will go before you into Galilee. Now, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure. You know, Jesus told his disciples a few times that he's going to have to suffer, he's going to be put to death, and he's going to be raised again. And he couldn't comprehend it. But now here he goes a step further. And I'm quite sure that this might be the first time that he says where he's going to meet them. He says, after I'm risen, I will go before you. Where? Into Galilee. Now remember that. That might pop up next Sunday morning out on the cemetery. I'm going to go before you in the Galilee. He tells them where he's going to meet them. He told them a number of times that he's going to die and he's going to raise again the third day. And he tells them here again that he says, after I am risen again, I will. You know, I pointed this out a number of times in the years that I've been here at Manada, that when Jesus says, I will, he will. Don't let that ever be a doubt in your mind. I will meet you, I will go before you in the Galilee. Now, here comes Peter. Peter answered and said unto him, he says, though all men shall be offended because of thee, yet will I never be offended of thee. I'll never be offended. I'm not going to turn my back on you. And Jesus said unto him, verily I say unto you, that this night, now, here comes this night again. You know, he said it just a few verses before, that this night the flock's going to, the sheep are going to be scattered. Now, he says, this night, before the rooster crows, thou shalt deny me how many times? 3 times. 3 times in one night, Peter. Peter said unto him, though I should die with thee, yet will I... pardon me. Peter said unto him, though I should die with thee, yet will I not deny thee. Likewise, also said all the disciples. All of them. All that were there at this time. And Jesus said, this very night, you're going to deny me. And we know that from here on, from here they go into the Garden of Gethsemane. And you all remember how sleepy they got there in the garden. When Jesus prayed. And he prayed that if it's God's will, that this cup might pass from him. But it wasn't God's will for the cup to pass from him. But Jesus said, nevertheless, not my will, but thine. And this morning as we were singing one of the songs, there's another song came to my mind. And we're going to close with singing number 438 in the New Church Hymnal. It says, years I spend in vanity and pride. When we were singing that song, I think it was when you sang that song, Jesus paid it all. You know, when we think of what Jesus did for us and the price he paid for our redemption, and yet, why me? Why was he concerned about this little fella here? That's the love. No, it was when we were singing the love of God. That's what it was. That's because of God's great love. Let's stand together and sing number 438, and then we'll be dismissed. Years I spend in vanity and pride, carrying on my overthrown sin.